So I'm just going to start off by giving you two numbers, the number 2 and the number 20.
Okay.
If Germany were to enter any military action today, they have 2 days of ammunition. The United States currently has 20 days of antimony inventory, and that's not just for the defense sector, that's for all uses of antimony. And we all know the proverb that timing is everything. That proverb resonates true, particularly in the junior mining sector. Timing is everything in regards to the metal that you're giving your shareholders exposure to. And right now is the ideal time for us as investors to be looking very closely at antimony. And for those that are not familiar with antimony, you're starting to see it now more in the mainstream media, educating everyone. It is a critical strategic element, and it's of significant strategic importance to almost every nation around the world. And we're currently experiencing a very severe supply crunch that I'll talk about more as we go through the slides. So I'm Scott Eldridge, nice to meet you. I'm CEO of the company. This is all new for me. This is actually the first time I've stood in front of an audience to present the company. I was appointed CEO of the company last week. And as was mentioned, we just announced our first of several acquisitions yesterday, but definitely follow our news, put us on your radar screen because we have more acquisitions to come. The next one will be on a European asset, and you'll see that next week. So antimony is on the periodic table, element number 51. It's classified as a metalloid, and it isn't necessarily evenly distributed around the world. The primary reserves from a mining perspective are controlled in 3 countries that are unfriendly to the West, I would call them, being China, Russia, and Tajikistan. Collectively, they control about 86% of reserves, and that puts the European Union, Canada, the US, Australia in a vulnerable position with the fire to our feet in terms of how are we going to source the antimony for our defense and military purposes. So I'd like to draw your attention here to the Fast Markets antimony price chart. Antimony is not an exchange-traded product. It's very similar to uranium, where the spot price is just the price of the most recent contract. So that means when a group like this puts a chart together, they just call 5 traders and ask them what their most recent trade was, and then they create an average. So that means this information is not in real time. There is a delay to it. So the most recent chart shows that antimony has significantly moved to the north, as you can see from the chart, in the last couple of years, going from 5,000 to 22,500 in the last 2 years, probably one of the best performing metals out there, and it's going to continue to do that. We were told by a trader yesterday here in Stockholm that's been in the business for 16 years that he was trading antimony between $28,000 and $30,000 a ton this week. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is the current chart is a little bit out of date, and prices are actually higher now. So why is antimony so critical? It's very critical mostly to ammunitions, military electronics. It's used in armor-piercing bullets. Flame retardants have a huge application in the defense industry. So imagine soldiers' uniforms, helmets, boots, tents, different machinery, all the electronics. They all need to have fire retardants in them to prevent the spread of fire, and the main mineral that's used to make those is antimony. It's also used in battery technology, simple lead acid batteries, and then what's come to the forefront now on the renewable energy side is the molten salt batteries that are becoming more used for intermittent renewable energy sources like nuclear and solar. Molten salt batteries will become important for storing energy to be later deployed into the grid. And it's also used in solar. So it's not just the defense side. That's probably 20% of the demand for antimony. It's very unique of the critical elements, which typically, say of the rare earths, they only have 1 application, but in antimony, you're dealing with 5. So the increased demand from the military side is just one piece of the puzzle. If we look back at the history of antimony in warfare, it was used in ancient times as an alloy, simply a steel strengthener. And then more often in recent times, sort of during World War I and World War II, it was actually named the hero metal because it started to be used in soldiers' clothing and tents. And there's multiple stories of British, European, Canadian American troops that say their lives was saved by a tent that had antimony in it as a fire retardant that helped to not spread a fire. In the defense sector, the supply chain is of utmost importance. And for those of you that have happened to follow the news on antimony, China just imposed an export restriction on the 15th of September. I would call it more of an export ban. So as I said, China is one of the largest producers from mine sites of antimony, but they also refine and smelt 63% of world antimony. So that tap has all of a sudden been turned off. So the US would primarily use China as their source for antimony products. And as of now, the US no longer has access to that. So in order to feed the ammunition and military demands, you need to have your supply chains in order. And China has completely disturbed and upended the antimony market from a supply chain perspective. And that shows how vulnerable the US and Europe is to that decision from China. And I don't think that decision is going to change anytime soon. It's going to be at least 6 or 12 months before we see any antimony coming out of China. As I mentioned earlier on, antimony is used in nuclear power plants. So when they're doing the maintenance and need to cool the rods, antimony can help create a safer environment for the people that are conducting that type of work. And it just allows for more stability and reliability on the maintenance side of nuclear power plants. And from a renewable energy perspective, we've seen an increased demand for uranium, and of course that's driven by the demand to build out nuclear power plants just because they have such a long life, and per kilowatt hour they can produce very cheap energy for all of our demands. Also mentioned earlier, antimony is used in solar. And for those of you that are familiar with solar, there is a degradation where a solar park will probably lose 5% of its capacity every year. Believe it or not, antimony actually helps decrease that degradation. So you wind up still having probably 90% of the installed capacity still available for energy generation as you get to the later life of a solar park. So it's very important from that aspect as well. It's not just Europe and the US that have classified antimony as being of national importance, as well as Japan, Australia, South Korea, the UK. Antimony is #1 on everyone's list here for that critical raw material aspect. And in the European Union, where again, we're predicting announcing an acquisition next week, we're very familiar with the Critical Raw Materials Act that was recently adopted in Europe, and those in the room are probably familiar with that as well. And one thing that's very attractive to us there is that we can get our antimony mineral project classified as being of EU importance, and that would qualify us for a fast-track permitting process. And that legislation states that the environmental and the mining permit have to be received within 24 months. I compare that to the US, where you're looking at probably 10 years or longer to get your environmental permit. So the support of the European Union, that legislation will really help us to fast track our project, and that will be beneficial to our shareholders. To transition into the property side, as I mentioned, we acquired our first property yesterday. This is a past producing antimony mine that saw production during World War I and World War II. It's called the West Gore property. So we now own this 100%. It's located in Nova Scotia in eastern Canada. And eastern Canada geologically does have a number of important past producing antimony mines. And with the significant rise here in the antimony spot price, there's significant demand from people like us that put companies together to go out and acquire these projects. But we were able to negotiate this acquisition 6 months ago when our team had the vision based on conducting research of where we saw antimony going. We saw the pullers and drivers going on, the increased military action around the world, particularly in Ukraine, Israel, in Asia as well. And we had the foresight that we wanted to give an opportunity to our shareholders to have direct exposure to antimony. in terms of how to invest in antimony. The only way we can get exposure to that is through the junior mining sector. There's no ETF or there's no exchange traded forward or contracts that we can get exposure to. So this is the right opportunity to get exposure to antimony. Just to briefly talk about the geology, the mineralization here is mostly stibnite. And stibnite is the mineral that typically hosts antimony. In addition to that, we also have native antimony as well as quartz veins. So as a past producer, this was a high-grade underground gold mine. And at a period during World War I, for several years, this was Canada's largest producer. So we've done a digitization of what the previous mine plan looks like. So the blue vertical lines there, the larger one, that's the internal shaft. And the mine had 7 different levels. And again, they were excavating high-grade antimony here, producing it as a concentrate. And at that time, it actually went over the UK to be smelted and refined and turned into ammunition to support the war efforts. Post-production, more during sort of the 80s and forward, various other companies held this asset during various spikes in the lithium price. And we've assembled some of that historical drill data. And the best result we saw there was 7 meters of 3.4% antimony, but it also has a very interesting gold kicker of 10 grams per ton. 10 grams per ton underground, that's a profitable gold mine anywhere in the world. But for us, that would actually be a byproduct because the antimony here is high grade, and the antimony right now is experiencing a very high spot price. So we're publicly listed on the CSE. In addition to that, we're listed on Frankfurt as well as the OTC in the US. We currently have 32 million shares issued and outstanding. Fully diluted, it would be about 67 million. And we do have a series of different warrant structures out there that are attached to previous financings. So these warrants are all now in the money. We're starting to see them get exercised. People are getting excited about the company. And with the full suite of warrants being exercised, this would bring in additional $4 million into the company in addition to the 3.3 million that we currently have. In terms of the management and the directors, again, this company just got started, so we have a very lean, mean team. My background, I've been in the metals and mining industry for 17 years. Started off as an equity buy-side analyst. I've ran my own merchant banking firm, raising institutional money in Europe for Canadian mining companies. And for the last 6 years, I've been on the issuer side of the business. So I'm supported by a very strong team here. We're very focused on governance, and that's led by Bobby and Latika. Mick Carew is our lead independent director. He's a PhD geologist, Australian, former BHP, brings a lot of credibility to the table. And for those of you that know Haywood Securities, which is one of the most prominent Canadian brokers in the mining business, Mick used to be a mining analyst there, writing research reports on companies just like us. Antimony is starting to become more and more mainstream media focused, and you can find several articles out there from Forbes, Visual Capital. We're seeing it again in the Financial Times. There was just an article on Monday, and we're going to start to see more and more of this as the risk for military activity around the world is becoming more and more tense, and every country around the world needs to arm itself. That article on Monday in the Financial Times also pointed out that before the war in Ukraine started, the annual EU budget for defense spending was $300 million. Several months into the Ukraine activity, that was increased to $500 million. There's legislation coming now from the defense minister of the EU that's going to take that to $500 billion. They want to create stability for companies that are in the defense industry. And by direct knockoff, we are in that business as an antimony player. So the stage has been set. We predicted the perfect storm, and we've delivered the right opportunity here for our shareholders. Okay. Thank you very much, and I think we'll move to...
Yeah, we have
time for a quick question.
We have time for some questions. You can have the last picture there. That's nice. So we can see the share price quotes. You mentioned China and export restrictions. Is that because they are, let's say, using everything you pointed out to the ammunition side and stuff like that? I mean, in the beginning of your speech, or is it just that they don't want to export it because they now decided that this is a critical mineral?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a mix of all those. So China wants that antimony for their own consumption, but they know that it's so valuable beyond the dollar value, they're stockpiling for potential rainy days ahead. And by them doing that, it prevents every other country around the world from having access to antimony.
And would you have any, well, let's say further acquisitions? It's a little bit bold to say that now, as you made an acquisition yesterday, but you know, there's always next week.
Well, yeah, next week we will be making an acquisition on a property in the European Union. I just can't say what country it's in, but it's identical to our Nova Scotian asset, where we did a global search for opportunities and we wanted to target past producing mines, because in the mining space, whether it's antimony, gold, silver, copper, it doesn't matter. Brownfield projects bring many, many benefits that you don't see from a greenfield project. So our strategy is that a brownfield project, you know it's there. It was never fully exploited. There's more resources to be found and reserves with exploration. And as long as they don't have any environmental legacy concerns, you've already had social acceptance and social license for these projects. So there's just so many benefits to having a brownfield site. So yes, we will be acquiring something next week, and we're excited about it. I can't say too much again, but there's a historical resource on it that actually puts the in situ value at the project at over $1 billion.
Okay.
Put it that way.
And so this will be more or less a critical mineral.
It'll still be antimony. Yeah. It'll be antimony.
Yeah. Excellent. This should be very interesting to follow, as you mentioned. Let's say one acquisition a week, and
no, we can't keep that up. We'll stop at 3.
Okay.
Three's enough to keep our hands full.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.